chapter 12. So if you turn there if you're able. But just as we begin, I wonder, does anybody want to confess their deepest, no, I'm just kidding. Does anybody want to confess their New Year's resolution? If you have one. Yeah?
Lose weight.
Lose weight.
Aye.
Yeah.
Not to eat chocolate that I bought somebody else.
She's saying that because she said she bought me a Toblerone and then ate it. But that's not a bad thing for me. Because I ate a whole Toblerone 2 days after Christmas, I have to confess.
Sorry about that.
Any other resolutions to confess? To get fit?
Aye.
Yeah. And has anybody got any resolutions you think might be of particular interest that they've just had at any point in their life? Any New Year's resolution you think it maybe a funny one or an interesting one? Anything you resolved to do or not do? Mary?
I once resolved to get on holiday more often.
To go on holiday more
More
often?
often.
That would be a
Once,
good
many
one,
years
yeah.
ago, and I didn't manage it until now, so now I'm thinking I'll resolve to go less holidays.
No one want to confess to anything? Just the normal sort of one. I've never really done resolutions much, because I know I'll fail. Yeah, you had your hand on it.
I got a Gaelic English Bible and I want to read both sides.
Alright, that's good, yeah. Was that someone wanting to share at the back there? A resolution? No? Well, my resolution this year is to get married. No, I'm just kidding.
Will I buy it?
No, I'm just joking.
Why is that a joke though?
Right. We're going to read the passage now. On a change of subject here. So Romans chapter 12. Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. Just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. If it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervour, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what's right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Shall we pray together? Lord, just as we have read this scripture today, we pray that as we proceed now to reflect on it, that we would hear you as you speak into our lives, as you read us, and as you see what's going on in our lives, and you might have something to say to us. Lord, would you help us to listen? Lord, would you shape us? Would you mold us? And Lord, as we come into a new year with new beginnings, Lord, would you inspire us? Would you envision us? So Lord, would you be with each of us now? Be with me as I speak. Be with everybody else as they're listening. Help us to hear from you, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen. So I think this is a good chapter to bear in mind and possibly tend to spend some time reflecting on or meditating on. And I suppose by meditating on it, I just mean taking time to read it, pray about it, and listen to what God might say to you through it. And I would encourage you, even after this morning, just as you're at the beginning of a new year, to take this chapter and just read over it, think about it, what might God say to you through it. But I just want to point out a few things myself that stood out. And if you had a New Year's resolution from the Bible, one might just simply be verse 1 of this chapter. I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, so remembering all that Christ has done for us, knowing that it's Him that saves us, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. And the rest of the chapter really goes on to talk about how we do that, and how that is possible, and what that means. And I chose this passage partly because I'd been thinking about a friend of mine, a friend that I've mentioned before. He was called Alec. And Alec died a couple of years ago. But he was someone who had come to faith fairly late on in his life, in his 60s. And I met him when he was living in a homeless hostel in Leith, actually. And he came along to the church with some other guys, and someone who came along with a young guy, actually, who had gone through a Christian rehab and then was then living in this hostel as he looked to then find accommodation. And Alec and him had become friends because they were flatmates. And the young guy had invited him along to the church. And as Alec got involved, he came to faith. And when he was baptized, actually, chose that particular verse in this chapter, really, as a key chapter for him. And this verse 1 was something that really meant something to him, and then the following kind of chapter. And I guess it was because as he came into a new type of life, this was a chapter that really spoke to him about what he wanted to be like and what he resolved to be. Even from his late 60s onwards, he was deciding, in view of God's mercy, in view of what God has done through his grace to save us, he decided he wanted to offer his body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And just, it's a long chapter, and you might be wondering which bits I might talk about or mention. And I want to start, just as we've thought about resolutions, with the do nots in the passage. And probably a slightly misleading thing to start with the do nots, because often people think that Christianity is about what you don't do. Like, okay, so there's certain things you're not to do in your life, and then you'll be fine. But actually, Christianity is a lot more about what you do. Because Jesus says, come and follow me, which is very much an active thing, isn't it? He's saying, well, there's actually a way to live, there's something to do. It's not necessarily about what you don't do. But just with that caveat, however, I am going to start with the do nots in this passage, because it helps us to see something. And I suppose that the closest that I would come to a resolution was a couple of years ago when I didn't eat any sugar for about 4 months, or at least not any obvious bad sugar. So, anyway, we'll start with the do not. And the first one in the passage is in verse 2, and it says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. The next one is in verse 3, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. I realised as I was reading through that I'd almost missed one, and that was in verse 14. It says, don't curse. Do not curse someone. And in verse 16, do not be proud. And also in verse 16, do not be conceited. And I just want to start with those first 4, because they're all actually heavily related. I'm pretty much saying the same thing. Don't conform to the pattern of this world. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. Don't be proud. Don't be conceited. And I suppose the temptation for people and for us in the world is to live with ourselves at the centre. And that would be the temptation for the coming year, to make the year all about ourselves, to place ourselves as our own idol in a sense. And when we see ourselves more important than others. And this would be the way of the world that he's mentioning. Don't conform any longer to the pattern of this world. It's not like everybody in the world is necessarily like that. It's like a sort of stereotype, saying, if I'm going to say what's not the way of Christ, it's the way of this world, and which is a way that puts ourselves at centre. And the issue with that is that then what happens is the end of ourself being more important than others, or doing better than others, or rising above others, is that we don't really care about other people so much. The end is what's important, and that justifies the means, how we treat others. And the way of this world is a corrupting way. It makes us less human, less ourselves, because God creates us to live in relationship with each other. And he goes on to talk about how the ideal is when we're a body and we all belong to each other and serve one another and help in different ways. But the way of this world would be when we reject that and we think, I belong to myself, and everything I do is going to be about what's best for me. And that seeps into society So the ideal, I suppose, even for all types of organisations is how someone becomes most themselves and more individual and is able to be self-reliant and achieve all their own goals and all the things that are good for them. Whereas the way of Christ is a bit different. The thing about when we make ourselves the centre is it makes us kind of look at other people differently. Other people can get in the way. They maybe took our role. How could they take our role? That should have been me that did that. Or they anger us through things they do or say, and you think, how could they say that to me? They might incite revenge when you think, oh, I'll get that person back for that. The way they spoke to me, the way they let me down. And the first four do nots are these kind of general ones about do not have this attitude of self first. And the next three after that, verse 17, don't repay anyone evil for evil. Reflect the kind of outworking of when we put ourselves centre. Because in verse 17 he's saying don't repay anyone evil for evil. Because if you do put yourself centre, that's what you'll be tempted to do. Don't take revenge in verse 19. Do not be overcome by evil. My friend Alec had sort of learned the hard way the results of living in the way of the world, of choosing to put self-centred. And the point, I suppose, at which he met Christians in his life, he was in a homeless hostel, he was ill, he had destroyed lungs, he was estranged from his family, didn't speak to them, he'd lost all his relationships, and he was just surviving. And that was the kind of result of living the way of the world. But there's another way, and that's the way of Jesus. And as we said in verse 1, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. And if we go back to the do nots, with each one there's a do, or something to focus on. So where we had do not conform to the pattern of this world, it then went on, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Verse 3 said, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment. Verse 16, don't be proud, but then be willing to associate with people of low position. So these suggestions of things to focus on, they reflect a theme in Paul, and I suppose it's a theme of the Gospels as well, which is where Paul talks about having the mind of Christ, and it's the way of humility, of not looking to advance yourself ahead of others, but instead looking to serve others and love others, and to put each other's interests above our own, as Paul would talk about elsewhere. And in Philippians chapter 2, Paul's giving the example of Timothy as someone to look up to, and he says, I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in your needs. So the way of Christ is one that looks to others' needs, looks to lift them, looks to love them. And it also calls us to walk a different way, which is the way of Christ, when we come into difficult situations, or when people maybe grate with us or irritate us. So the last three of the do nots, where it said, do not repay anyone evil, but what we are to do is, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Verse 19, don't take revenge. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. Don't be overcome by evil, verse 21. but overcome evil with good. And all of these reflect the teaching of Jesus, which of course is that we are to serve one another, to love one another, and to love our neighbour. And so these are actually some of the core themes of the gospel. And there are very few things that Jesus repeats numerous times in the Gospels, but in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke, he repeats 3 times this whole idea of don't look to rise above others or to advance yourself, but instead look to serve. Whoever wants to be the greatest must become the least. So there's a different way of living that comes out, and that's part of being a living sacrifice. And this is something that I started to see in my friend Alec. And this way of life, it leads to certain consequences as well. So just as he had realised and experienced that when he lived the way of the world, he ended up in certain situations and certain relationship situations and estranged from his family. So when he started to pursue a different way, things started to change in his life. And this passage suggests that there's a number of things happen when we choose to have the mind of Christ. And the very first one that it says is in verse 2. After it talks about be transformed by the renewing of your mind, it says, then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing and perfect will. It's interesting that at the start of a new year, you may be trying to hear God, and trying to maybe listen to what his plans for you might be, or what he might want you to do in certain situations, or with your life. And a good starting point is to start to choose the way of Christ, rather than the way of the world. So rather than just thinking what's good for me, what's best for me, start to think, how can I serve, how can I belong to others, how can I use the gifts that I have, how can I walk the Jesus way, the way of serving others, of loving them. Because the thing is that if we're walking the way of the world, it's as if we're trying to listen to God and there's 100,000 other voices all like shouting at the same time. There's a moment when you start to hear God speak more clearly, is when you've already repented, I suppose. You know, when you turn, there's some things that are clear in the scripture. What does God want you to do? Well, he doesn't want you to walk the way of the world, he wants you to walk the way of Christ. And that's just an obvious one. So, and once we follow that and we follow God's guidance, we find ourselves walking away from the noise that might distract us, that would distract us from hearing him. And we will start to hear him speak more specifically into our life on certain issues. But if there's things that you're maybe really struggling to hear God with, the first question you might want to ask yourself is my focus this year on myself, or is it on following the mind of Christ? And then as we begin to choose the mind of Christ, God will start to whisper in other areas of our life, and we'll actually be able to hear him. My friend Alec had a really amazing experience when he first started getting involved in the church, and he went along with these friends of his to some church services, and he suffered from extreme sort of arthritis and had a lot of pain and stuff. And he talked of how when he went along to the church, then that night he went back to the hostel, and he was lying in bed, and there was like an hour window where something happened, and he was just really aware of some sort of sense of peace, and all his pain left him for it was an hour or a few hours, and he was just sort of lying there in his bed, pain free. And he remembered, like, he talked about how there was words going through his head that he did the right thing going along to the church. And he felt that God was speaking to him, saying that. And he had this sort of window, just that small window where he was pain free. Interestingly, it then came back the next day, but it was as if God was affirming to him, actually, you're choosing to change the way your life worked. And God wanted to affirm him and say that's the right thing. And full healing for Alec comes later in the next life. But just for that window, he actually experienced that God has the power to heal us, and he will heal us. And that gave him a hope, and his faith grew, and he had hope for the future. And ultimately he went to the waters of baptism, and was baptized, and became a part of the church. So a second thing that might happen as we begin to choose to walk and to have the mind of Christ is that we'll start to use our gifts, and there's a large part of this passage is about how we have different gifts according to the grace given us, and encouraging us to use them. And interestingly though, often people can think, I wonder what my gift is, like what God has given me, like as if I'm so self-important that I might have a gift that will make me feel good. But in this passage it's got a different kind of emphasis. And emphasis is more that God gives us gifts to bless others. And so it even says that the members belong to all the others. So each of the members belongs to the others. So any gift that you have is a gift that's given to the church. It's given for us to use to serve one another. It's not something to sort of puff up ourselves, but it's something to be used to bless others. And as Alec began to grow in his faith, he started to serve in all different ways. Alec loved to paint, but not pictures like Carol Ann does, just liked to paint walls. So he was almost involved in painting the church, or he would go around to people's houses actually to help them. He'd also worked in doing body work for cars, and that came in very handy when my friend Danny was building an outreach vehicle or doing outreach on the streets in Edinburgh, and Alec helped him with that and was able to advise him. Alec also loved to cook, and he'd been a cook for a large part of his working life, and he loved to come along to outreach meetings that we had where there was homeless people would come in and we would speak to them and spend time with them. And Alec loved to cook the bacon rolls, or to cook some sort of food, prepare sandwiches, and have them there. And it created an environment of hospitality and love and welcome. So he began to use his different gifts. And then a third thing that happens in this passage, and we see in this passage when we choose the Jesus way, is that we start to have a different way of relating in difficult circumstances. And we'd already sort of read the parts about loving your enemy, about forgiving others, about not being overcome by evil, so not letting hate or anger or these things become something that bubbles up in you and swallows up and controls your mind and your words and ultimately traps you. And as Alec realised these things, and he heeded what it says in here about love must be sincere, he started to see reconciliation in his life. And so he had a brother that he'd not spent time with or seen for years and years, and then he went and they started to be in contact, and they were able to forgive each other, and they were reconciled, and they spent time together, and he saw his family. And then finally he also came to be someone that was characterised by compassion and love. And I think it was the final time actually that I saw Alec was when I was out in the outreach van in Edinburgh at the bridges. And Alec came walking past, and he actually was at the point where he had discovered he had some sort of severe cancer, and he had just a short time to live. And came and he had his little dog with him, a little puppy collie that he loved. But anyway, we went for a little walk just because we were going to talk about how he was and stuff. And as we walked, we came around the corner and we met someone who we both knew who had done a Bible study with us for a while. And it was another guy who was a bit older, in his 60s, who struggled with alcohol abuse. Unfortunately, he'd slipped back into it, and he was just sitting like on the pavement, slumped up against the wall, and then just barely sort of conscious and stinking and smelling, and everybody was sort of avoiding him. And Alec went and sat down next to him and put his arm around him, and we called the ambulance because he was so frail, the guy, and it was a freezing, I think, January night. And Alec, even though he himself was frail in health and had a few weeks to live, sat next to him and talked to him and had his arm around him and had compassion for him and loved him. And he chose to walk the way of Christ. Being willing even to associate and spend time with people, someone that others would look down on and consider to be of no value. And I think that the story of Alec is just a good challenge and a good reminder for us as we come into a new year of the kind of life and priorities that God would have for us. Are we going to, given that there are people like Alec who lost their life, will we this year make our lives count? Will we heed the urge of Paul to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God? Will we have sincere love? Will we turn away from the way of the world? Allow our minds to be renewed, to stand for loving, serving, and lifting others. We're going to come to celebrate that way of life. So when we share communion, we don't just remember that Jesus died for us, that we can be saved. We remember that He actually calls us to a certain type of life, and it's the way of sacrifice. And that's what we're doing when we remember Him. We're remembering and resolving to follow Him.